Welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, 8 most disturbing true Appalachia deep woods horror stories. Cold dark hollers, vanishing trails, voices where no roads go. Before we start, like and subscribe and comment where you're from and what time you're watching so YouTube keeps showing you stories like this. Lantern low, trees leaning. Ready? Let's begin. I was 20 and cocky enough to think a topo map and a good headlamp made me bulletproof. My name's Rowan Pike. I grew up on the edge of West Virginia's Monongahela, where the ridges roll like frozen waves and the hollows can hold darkness even at noon. By the time I finished high school, I'd hiked most of the marked trails and more of the faint ones. I told myself the forest and I had an understanding. I'd respect it, and it would leave me be. In late October of 2019, I picked a window of cold, clear weather, and decided to do my first real solo overnight. Not a reservable site with a tent pad and bear cables, just a shelf I'd found months earlier above a cold reach of Gladdy Fork. You get there by following a deer trace that sometimes isn't a trace at all, then skirting laurel thickets until the trees step back like curtains. I thought I wanted solitude. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. My parents did not love the plan. I promised satellite check-ins morning and night, set 2 waypoints for my route, packed an extra battery, and gave my mom the frequency for my inReach like a peace offering. My dad slipped a spare headlamp in my pocket, with a look that said, "Humor me." I did. The Forest Service spur I used as a trailhead ended in a rusted gate, and a view down into the kind of mixed hardwood canopy you can smell from the road. Oak tannin, wet leaf, mineral water. The air had that bright cold that makes your breath go white and turn sound crisp. The first mile was easy on an old logging bench. After that, the path went to the logic of terrain. Stay high when the ground goes soft. Let contour do the work. Read the way water wants to run and don't fight it. A grouse exploded out of cover like a thrown rock and left my heart thudding. Ravens stitched the sky and made those glassy clicks that pass for jokes when you're alone. I reached the shelf near 5. That last slant of light when even the tired leaves find one more flare of gold. The spot was everything I remembered. Beech and hemlock, a slab of stone for a stove, creek flashing slate and white. I set the tent, double-guyed it because I didn't trust the frost-loosened ground. Filtered water until it tasted like snow, and made dinner out of the sort of packet that only counts as food if you've carried it for miles. I hung my bag, walked the perimeter to memorize it in daylight. Sent my all good, camp set, message, and then let the dark finish its slow work. Fire isn't a thing you own in the woods. It's a loan. I fed it a little, then drowned it clean, forked the ash to steam one more time for certainty's sake, and slid into the bag with the creek doing its endless talk and a barn owl trying out notes up the hill. Sleep came like a trap door. I woke like I'd been surfaced by a hand. The watch face said 2:11 when I tapped it, but that was just a number. My body felt a kind of a tension I don't have a name for. Every sense up on tiptoe. I lay still and listened. The creek was there, a steady hush over stone. Wind moved in the crown of the trees like breath. A mouse worried a leaf in the near dark. All ordinary. Then I heard footsteps. Not deer, those go 2 quick beats and a pause. Not bear. Those crackbrush huff when they catch your scent and move with a kind of messy confidence. This was slow, precise, weight on dry leaves, a faint drag at the end of each step, as if whatever walked didn't quite match the ground or was carrying something long that ticked the litter. Left of the tent, then past the head, then behind, then the right side, then gone back into the trees. A circle. I kept still the way prey animals do, without the dignity to call it anything else. The little fixed blade I keep sheathed by the bag found my hand on its own. I didn't breathe. I tried not to swallow. Some older animal part of me said, "Stay small. Do not declare yourself." The steps faded. Quiet returned, but it wasn't the same. It pressed. The mind does small repairs in moments like that. Maybe a branch rocked loose and ticked the leaves. Maybe a deer made an odd choice of route. But the circle came again before I could make any repair stick. Same arc. Closer. Now I could hear 2 sounds at once. The compress and release of leaf litter and a slow, deliberate breathing that hung just a beat ahead, like a bellows with a hand on it. The rhythm didn't belong to me. I could feel my own pulse in my gums. This was not that. It stopped behind the tent, nylon and a few inches of air between me and it. No brush against the fly, no shadow. Just that sense of a body altering the room you are in. The breathing ran its count like a metronome. I held mine until my chest hurt. After a while, seconds or minutes I can't say, it resumed the walk and finished the ring. It made more circles than I want to remember. I'm in that thin part of the night does a trick where it stretches and thins, and you can put your thumb through it. The cold seeped through my pad like a slow leak. Every hair on my forearm stood up, and I had the absurd certainty that each stood up independently, as if to have its own say. Once the breathing caught on something like a tiny click, and I wanted to unhear it, because admitting you hear a thing is a way to let it all the way in. When the dark finally lightened from absolute to almost, the steps drifted away, the breathing went with them, and the creek took up all the space again. I did not move until the inside of the tent was a kind of gray that had nothing to do with fear. When I unzipped, the sound of the zipper was rude in a way I can't explain. Camp looked honest. The stove, the ditched ash turned cold black, the line sagging under my food bag. If I hadn't woken, I could have convinced myself nothing had come. Then I looked at the ground. Prints circled the tent at a patient spacing, each one long and narrow as my forearm. Not boot tread, not bare double steps layered on themselves, not deer slots melted by thaw. 4 blunt toes showed at the front in a way that looked almost carved. The heel ended soft, like a foot that flexed more than ours. In 2 places, weight pressed through leaf litter to the darker damp. Whatever it was heavy. I took pictures. My hands shook. The best photo looked like nothing much. The way photos do when you need them to prove something that maybe shouldn't be provable. Everything sensible in me said, pack and go. The other part, the small professor who lives in the back of my skull and loves answers, said follow just far enough to know. I compromised with cowardice. Knife on belt, water bottle, phone on airplane for a clean camera. Bear spray on a chest strap, no pack. The line ran north, indifferent to obstacles. Where I detoured around a blowdown, the stride stepped over it as if it was nothing. A patch of damp duff took the prints like clay. I could see that 4-toe shape again and wanted 5 so badly it hurt. The trail cut straight through a tangle of greenbrier that would have made any animal choose a new path. It didn't. It felt like it knew the shortest way to the next thing it cared about, and that wasn't me. At a low outcrop where rock shouldered up and took the hill, the sign ended. Rock eats tracks. I stood and listened the way I've learned to listen, without hunting for words. The forest offered me what it had. Wind and dry oak leaf, a pileated 2 hollows over. A single leaf shifting its mind about the branch. No branch snapped. No breath that wasn't mine. The creek spoke at steady syllables. I put my boot where the last clean print had been and felt ridiculous for needing to. Packing felt like trying not to rattle a room you couldn't see into. I moved carefully because moving carefully steadied my hands. I sent my check-in, all good, hiking out, and believed it as best I could. I kept my headlamp in my jacket pocket even though the sun was high. These are superstitions that look like preparedness and maybe are both. The hike back was faster than was smart. The forest, generous the day before, had turned into a place with rules I hadn't learned. Every shadow looked like an argument I didn't want to have. I checked behind me more than I want to admit, and hated the phrase, check your 6, even as I did it. When I reached the truck, the cold of the aluminum bed under my palm felt like the right kind of real. I said thanks out loud to no one. I told my parents the trip was great. I showed the photos to a friend's dad, a wildlife biologist who's seen more sign than anyone I know. He pinched and zoomed and gave me a list of possibilities. Bear overlap, leaf distortion, hoax prints with cut boards. He didn't pick one to die on. He just said, be careful where you go alone, and handed my phone back like he was returning a knife he didn't want. I didn't go back that winter. I didn't even say the creek's name. When October came around again, 3 friends wanted a 2-night loop, and I suggested that drainage. I told myself that 4 people made noise enough to keep the world ordinary. We camped on the same flat. The trip was aggressively normal. We ate too much cheese because Tucker can't count. Told the kind of half-true stories fire invites. got a spit of rain that made us pull the fly, and then stopped pretending to be brave about sleeping cold. No footsteps, no breathing that didn't belong to us. I slept with a knife under my palm and felt silly, and was glad to feel silly. On the last morning, coffee in hand, I walked the edge of the clearing to take a last look. 3 beech trunks stood about 20 feet apart. On each, chest high, a symbol had been cut. Not initials, not a survey blaze. One looked like a thin oval with 4 short ticks pressed into its rim. One was 2 crooked lines with a notch above. Ribs with a key if you wanted it to be a picture. One was a kind of narrow foot with too few toes. The cuts had a little weather in them, enough to say they weren't brand new, but I had studied those smooth trunks a year before, because I liked the way they caught light. They weren't marked then. They were marked now. All 3 faced inward toward where my tent had been. I didn't tell my friends. We hiked out, ate hot dogs at a place that tastes better dirty and tired, and I slept like a person who hasn't heard a strange thing breathe. Winter cut the ridgelines down to bone. In March, a windstorm took the power and the town went honest dark. I stepped onto the porch and felt the wood cold through my socks, and the kind of quiet that makes the refrigerators hum, when it's there, sound like gossip. With the grid down, the neighborhood felt like a diorama. All the shapes you recognize, none of the noise that tells you it's safe. For a second, I thought I heard steps, not in the yard, not in the street, but in the space beyond where the porch light would have ended if it had been working. It was only my pulse, I said. It went away when I coughed. I told myself that and decided to mean it. In April, I started trying to explain the prints to myself with words that walked me away from what they were. People make hoaxes. Bears double step. Leaves lie. Human hearing at 3 in the morning inside a nylon bag is an unreliable witness. Each explanation lasted a day and then failed under the weight of how clean the line had been, how even the breath, how patient the ring. In May, I ran into an old-timer at the hardware store, the kind of man who knows how the county used to be before the paved road. He asked where I'd been walking lately. I told him the creek's name. He went quiet like he was reading a piece of paper I couldn't see. "There's pockets up there," he said, "that keep their own time. If one takes notice of you, best to back out the way you came. Don't try to cut across it, you won't save any time." He smiled without humor. Some places like to be left alone. I didn't ask him what he meant. I had a feeling the wrong answer would be worse than no answer at all. That summer, I stayed to trails with blazes nailed into trees I didn't have to name myself. The hikes tasted like nothing but safety. In September, when the ridge turned copper and the morning started with frost like salt, I drove the high road above the drainage and parked at a pull-off big enough for 3 cars. From there you can see down into the folds and suspect the creek by sound more than sight. The wind coming up out of the hollow smelled like leaf and cold stone. A red tail turned slow circles in a thermal like it was thinking about nothing. Circles can be good. Circles can also be a way of keeping you where you shouldn't stay. I don't treat the woods like a puzzle I can always solve anymore. The forest is generous and indifferent in turns. It'll show you a bear asleep under spruce like a blessing, and it'll take your heat, your light, and your nerve with no notice at all. Some hollows welcome you. Some saddles urge you along. A few flats, small as a tent's footprint, belong to something that doesn't care about your good intentions or your GPS breadcrumb trail. If you wake alone in a place like that and hear steps making a slow, honest circle just beyond where your light would end, I hope you do the simple, hardest thing. Stay still. Keep your throat quiet. Don't unzip to prove anything to yourself. Let it finish. Wait for the gray that's more than fear. Leave clean. Take your story with you or don't. Either way, don't insist later, under kitchen lights. And a working fridge. That the world is only the shape you drew on paper. The forest keeps maps we don't get to hold. On most of them, we're a light pencil mark, easily erased. On a few, someone long-fingered has drawn a ring around a shelf beside a cold creek and written something in a script we don't read. If you find yourself inside that ring, the right answer is to be small, listen well, and go when the light says it's time. I was 31 the spring this happened, old enough to know better and still stubborn enough to chase solitude. My name is Ivo Calder. I'd moved from Knoxville down into North Georgia a few years earlier, and the Cohutta wilderness became my church. Miles of hemlock shadow, cold creeks slick as glass, and ridgelines that looked like the backs of sleeping whales. I hiked most weeks, sometimes with friends, more often alone with my dog, a Belgian Malinois mix named Kestrel. He was lean and watchful and had the kind of easy confidence that made me think the woods had signed off on us. Late April of 2022 gave us one of those blue sky Thursdays that make you feel like the world's been polished. 65 degrees, breeze just enough to move the new leaves, warblers scribbling all over the canopy. I took the loop out of Dyer Gap, 10 or so miles if you add the spur to the overlook above the Jacks River. Weekdays meant quiet trailheads and empty parking lots, my favorite kind of company. I threw a day pack together, water filter, snacks, a light rain shell, clipped Kestrel's harness and rolled out before sunrise. The first hour slid by the way good miles do. Kestrel trotted the lead like a metronome, nose down, ears flicking to invisible notes. The trail stitched along a slope where galax grows like scales. Sun came through in coins. I could hear water long before I saw it, that particular feathered hiss of spring runoff over stones. It was the sort of morning that makes you think you've learned the forest's language, or at least its pronunciation. We were 2 hours in when Kestrel stopped. Not the "I smelled a turkey" kind of pause. He planted, muscles trembling in a way I'd only seen around thunderstorms. He stared hard downslope into a tangle of laurel, tail low, mouth closed. I scanned the green and caught nothing but the usual. Leaf flicker, a small run of chip chatter somewhere left. Then Kestrel broke the one rule he never broke. He left the trail without a command. Kestrel, heel. Nothing. He ghosted off, between rhododendron trunks as if he knew exactly which air molecule to follow. I didn't want him pushing a bear or getting into a feral hog's business, so I went after him, crab walking beneath low limbs, grabbing saplings for balance, muttering all the useless threats we say to our dogs when we're scared. He kept a steady angle, not zigzagging the way he does when he's curious. It was purpose, drawn taut. A few minutes of that and the slope eased into a flat I didn't know existed. No blaze, no cairn, the kind of clearing you could stand beside for a decade and never see. The cabin was tucked into the far edge like something the woods had grown around. 12 by 16 feet, rough timber, roof furred with moss, a single door and 2 small windows gone to spiderweb cracks. You see ruin camps all over these mountains, old hunt shacks, moonshine ghosts, but they wear their emptiness like a smell. This one didn't. Kestrel held himself low and let out a growl that barely left his throat. He's not a barky dog. When he does that rumble, it means one thing: this isn't right. "Hello," I called, because the only thing worse than finding a person is surprising one. "Coming up." No answer. The door was pulled almost closed, just enough to make a line. I pushed it with 2 fingers and it scraped in a way that made my teeth ache. A damp, stale smell came out. Mildew, old sweat, a hint of something sweeter and spoiled beneath it. I lifted my phone, flashlight on, and swept the single room. Dirt floor tamped flat, a cot frame with a stained mattress, a plastic table with a folding chair. On the table, rows of water bottles, a few brand new butane canisters, a little isobutane. Stove, a battery lantern, a bag of beef jerky with yesterday's date punched into the seam. Clothes on nails. Neutral athletic stuff you could buy at any big box store. A pair of trail runners under the cot, men's size somewhere near mine. A pack hung by the door, mud dried in a pattern that said whoever carried it moved through places that don't like you moving. My feet wanted the door, my head wanted answers, and then the light slid to the wall above the table. Photographs, dozens of them, tacked in neat rows, all hikers, all taken from a distance. Men, women, teenagers, older couples, standing at overlooks, fording an easy creek sitting on a log to tie a boot. Different seasons and different clothes and different faces, but the same kind of framing. Shots you take when you're not supposed to be seen. Under each photo, a notation in small, tidy block letters. TH710, Blue Fleece, Solo, Tuesdays. Red Pack stops at mile 3. Pair splits, she lags. Look left. Some captions carried dates. Some had marks like checkboxes inked in red. There are moments your body understands before your mind does. I felt my scalp tighten. Kestrel pressed his shoulder against my knee hard enough to move both of us. I recorded what I could. Wide pan of the wall. Close-ups of the notes, the table, the stove brand and model, the type of shoe under the cot. Even the pattern of nails holding up jackets. I took pictures of the floor because I've watched enough. People smarter than me find truth in what I think is nothing. My hands didn't want to work right. I couldn't tell if the cabin air was cold or if I was. The sound came in like a pencil through paper, a low engine somewhere to our right, climbing, slow enough to feel deliberate. Kestrel's growl cut off. He went rigid and put his nose to the crack in the door, inhaled, and then was moving before my brain gave a command. I didn't close the door. I didn't look back. We ran. The laurel reached for my clothes the way only laurel can. A dead branch stole my hat. A thorn let a line of blood out of my forearm. The engine note rose, stopped, dropped, paused. Whoever it was had gears and ground to choose from. I tried to pick a straight line uphill toward where I thought the main trail ran, but in the green you learn fast how faith can be directionless. Kestrel knows my voice in all its registers. I said his name the way you say a prayer you're not sure you believe in. He waited at a gap in a deadfall, and then showed me which side to take. He ignores me when he wants to, and saved me anyway. It was maybe 10 minutes, it was maybe 30. When I saw cut tread and the particular scatter of crushed quartz that means you're on a maintained line, something in me let go. I recognized a rock outcrop shaped like a crooked molar. The parking lot, by memory, was 2.5 miles west. We didn't stop. I didn't look behind me because I was busy not tripping on my own feet. Kestrel trotted with his head turned slightly back, reading the wind. At the truck, I got the doors shut and locked as if that meant something out there. My fingers shook so badly it took 2 tries to get the key in. I backed out dangerous and drove worse back toward Watson Gap, where there's a Forest Service office with a little shelf of pamphlets and a ranger you can either catch or miss by 5 minutes. I caught a man named Pell, square build, sun lines at the corners of his eyes, the steady look of someone who's had more than one version of bad brought in. He asked me to sit. I told the story once, then again slower. He didn't interrupt much. When I put my phone down in front of him and started swiping through the pictures, the muscles along his jaw did one small flex and went quiet again. He made a call. Then 3 more. By early afternoon, there were uniforms and plain clothes in that office who didn't say much to me. One woman from the sheriff's office asked me to go over my path on a map, and then had me repeat the distances in my own words. A man from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation asked for my consent to image my phone. I signed the paper he slid, to me because it felt like the only useful thing I could do. They asked if I could show them. I said yes and then felt my stomach turn over at the idea of going back. We went the next morning in a convoy that felt both comforting and performative. Rangers, sheriff's trucks, a state SUV, a boxy UTV on a trailer. Kestrel stayed at home on a mattress he hates when I'm not in the house. I left him with my neighbor, who told him he was a good boy in 3 different voices. The cabin sat where it sat, and it wasn't the same. The order had been vacuumed out of it. The photos were gone. The table was empty. The stove was not there. The nails held nothing. Even the water bottles had disappeared. There was a drag mark on the dirt floor as if someone had pulled a cooler or a trunk, and the cot mattress was flipped upside down. A new side of stains presented like a joke. Pell crouched and ran his fingers lightly over the pressed dirt, in a way that made me think he used to trap as a kid. A GBI tech in Tyvek stepped like a crane and measured things I couldn't see. Someone found a trail camera, small, angled, at chest height to catch a door opening, and bagged it like it was a snake. They didn't tell me much. They never do, and I don't blame them for it. What I do know came later, piecemeal. The images I took were enough to identify a few faces. Rangers reached out to those hikers, gentle, apologetic. None of them had known. None had been bothered that day, at least not obviously. The sheriff's office started looking at missing person files with different eyes. A state investigator told me softly that there had been unsolved disappearances in adjoining counties going back several years, single hikers mostly. Nothing to hang a name on, a lot to think about at night. They found 2 more setups that summer. One was a tent platform buried under brush. One a panel of camo netting clipped between trees to hide a little camp just off a horse trail. Both scraped clean. The photos on my phone became what the GBI called contemporaneous documentation. I learned the phrase and hated it. I still hike. I changed how. I text someone my route and I keep it. I carry a small can of spray I used to roll my eyes at. I stay on trail unless there's a very good reason not to. If Kestrel says no, we turn around. He gets the vote I didn't give him that day. And I tell people this when they'll listen. The forest has teeth you can see. Weather, water, gravity, all honest, all indifferent. The more complicated fangs wear boots. They study habits. They put tacks in lines. They choose weekdays for the same reasons we do. If you see a structure where there shouldn't be one, and it looks a shade too lived in, trust the small part of you that wants your feet pointed the other way. Don't tidy. Don't explore. Leave with your questions, and give them to someone whose job it is to be answered badly by the world. Sometimes driving up to a trailhead too early, I catch my hand checking the rear view more than it needs to. Sometimes at home I'll wake in the thin hour and think I hear a vehicle on gravel somewhere it shouldn't be. That's just what fear does. It replays the worst scene on a loop and calls it vigilance. Maybe that's useful. Maybe it's just a tax. What I know is this. If Kestrel hadn't taken the line he took, if I had arrived an hour later, if the sound of that engine had braided in with the sound of my boots in a different part of the morning, I'd be a name read off in a room where people don't look at each other when they're finished. Instead, I'm a person who took too many pictures and made it to a uniform in time. The ridgelines were there before us, and they will be there when we're gone. Most days, they'll let you pass through and leave exactly what you brought behind. Some days, they'll show you a thing you wish they hadn't, and you'll get home with your breath still inside you, and your world a notch smaller. That's not a reason to quit walking. It is a reason to listen when the dog you trust tells you the woods are speaking in a voice you don't want to learn. I'm Reeve Halcomb, 34 now, and I have a gap in my life I can't fill. 7 days that aren't there. Not a blur or a fog, just a hole you can look straight through and see nothing. I've hiked backcountry since I was a teenager. It's where I've been most myself. Under trees, moving light, watching weather. I plan well. I stick to what I plan and I don't invite drama into the woods. None of that mattered last October. I'd mapped a 5-day loop through the Boston Mountains, northern Arkansas. Remote shoulders of the Ozarks where the ridges run like ribs and the hollows feel unending. About 40 miles if you draw the line tight, more if you wander. I'd done pieces of it in other seasons. The forecasts looked friendly. Clear, cool, nights in the low 40s. I laid everything out. Shelter, filter, stove, emergency kit. Checked it twice against my list. I texted my route and turnaround times to my partner and called the district office with my itinerary. I left a printout on my dashboard. I did the ordinary smart things we all do before we step off the edge of reception. The first 2 days gave me the trip I'd pictured. A sky the color of hard enamel. Leaf light flickering over the trail. Oaks going copper, hickories on fire. Somewhere between mile 12 and mile 15, I pass through a saddle that always feels like a gateway. You drop into it, and the traffic of your head finally goes quiet. I wrote a couple lines in my small notebook at lunch, the kind of nothing that matters later. Water good at Wolf Pen. One blow down after the spur. Coyotes last night, far off. I took photographs I'd have been proud to print. I pitched on a pad above a little run and made an easy dinner. Everything was the kind of ordinary that keeps me coming back. I remember zipping my bag. I remember the woods settling, that long, slow hush that means night has stepped fully into the room. If there was a sound, it didn't make it into the memory I still have. I woke on bare ground with dirt in my teeth. There wasn't a trail within sight. The understory was the kind that catches your clothes and keeps them. Greenbrier, spice bush, tangles of vine. My sleeping bag was around me like a shed skin, torn, wet with mud, streaked with something brown that had dried tacky. My hands looked like I'd spent a week pushing glass, cuts layered over other cuts, some fresh, some half-healed. Everything hurt in the honest way a hard day hurts and the wrong way a fall does. I'd never seen the patch of woods I was in. The light was wrong for morning, wrong for evening, flat, high, and mean. I checked my watch. The face wasn't cracked. The time meant nothing until the date slid into focus. A week had passed. I'd fallen asleep at the end of day 2. The watch told me it was day 9. Standing made the world tilt. I found my pack under a rotten log, straps fouled with leaf litter and bits of fern. My tent wasn't there. My pad wasn't there. The stove was gone, the small pot gone. The first aid kit was present and thinned. Half the bandages used. Antibiotic grease twisted nearly empty. My phone was dead. My GPS unit was dead. My camera, to my surprise, woke up when I pressed the power button. Hope rushes and burns fast. I opened the gallery. There were hundreds of new images I didn't remember framing. The first handful could have been mine on any day. A blaze on a post oak, a fern bed, a shot down a trail where stones show white as bone. Then the rhythm changed. Photographs taken by headlamp, the light hard and close. The round mouth of a cave in a bluff face. The mouth again from another angle, marked with something like soot. A narrow corridor sloping down, walls wet and pocked. The beam catching runnels of calcite. A rusted rail half buried in silt. I pinched and zoomed on shot after shot, trying to pull order out of the pixels. In a few frames you could see the toe of my boot, and once, my left hand with someone's wrap job. Clean strips of cloth crisscrossed and filthy. Deeper into the sequence came the pieces that have lodged like splinters. Lines scored into rock with a care that felt like repetition. Circles quartered and double-quartered. A shape that might have started as a square and then learned to breathe. A figure like a ladder with uneven rungs. They were too straight and too consistent for whim. A wall where the limestone had been shaved flat and then marked. Pale signs over darker stone. A cavity opening off a larger tunnel. Roof braced by beams, one beam snapped and sagging. In one picture, a structure resolved from the darkness at the edge of the frame. The way a face resolves when you stare long enough. An arrangement of uprights and cross members that wasn't cave, and wasn't mining in any style I recognize. It looked old, older than the iron on the ground, older than the graffiti in another shot. The modern names and dates sprayed loud like a dare. I paged forward until daylight returned. The last photograph made my throat close. Was the entrance again, now in morning or afternoon, I can't say. The bluff above it wore lichen like map stains. Off to the left, blurred but there, were ridge lines I knew. The shoulder of Hare Mountain, a notch that looked like where two creeks meet. My camera had been set to record coordinates. The numbers put that image over 40 miles from where I'd gone to sleep. I drank the last of what was in my bottle without thinking, and then had to fight the urge to be stupid and rush. I took stock the way you're supposed to, fingers and toes intact, no obvious breaks, no hot pain that screams inside. I pulled my filter and found it jammed with grit, rinsed it as best I could with what I could shake from the bag, and got enough to make walking possible. Then I pointed myself toward the line of ridge the last photo suggested and moved. No pace, no style, just the animal part of walking. I tripped often. I stopped often. At some point I cried without noticing I was doing it, the way a dehydrated body leaks. A fire road cut across a slope like an answer. I followed it because it was a line, and kept following until there was a sign that had letters on it, and then a gravel lot where I didn't recognize a single vehicle. The ranger station was farther than I wanted it to be. A man behind the desk stood up fast when I opened the door. I must have looked like a mistake. They put water in me and then more water. An ambulance took me the last miles I couldn't drive. They said severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, acute weight loss, 15 pounds I didn't have to spare. They mapped the abrasions and the bruising and the odd pattern on my knees where stone had taught skin a lesson. Scans said my brain had no visible insult. Blood work said I hadn't taken anything and nothing had been slipped in. Neurology shrugged in the professional, careful way that means they are sure of the machinery and not the human in it. I told what I could tell. The forest, the night, the nothing, the waking. I handed over the camera as if it were a witness. A search was mounted for the obvious reasons and the good ones. They swept the last known points from my notebook, and the place the camera thought it had been. They found my tent fly ripped and stuck in a thicket 10 miles from the creek where I'd eaten on day 2. They found a handful of things both near and far. A spoon, a length of cord sawn through rather than cut. The orange cap to a map pen. They didn't find the hole in the bluff. They went where the coordinates said to go, and walked in strings and boxes. And nothing opened that hadn't already been opened by someone else. A ranger I liked. A woman with a voice that belonged to someone who spent her life outdoors. Let me see the official words when the report closed. The phrase dissociative episode sat in the middle of it like a model of a building. Clean, plausible, unscuffed. Dehydration, hypothermia, fever, a latent condition no one had noticed. A wander away from camp. A week of movement with memory turned off. Photographs taken without context, showing natural karst features, misread by a tired mind. The part of me that respects the world's rational spine nodded along. The part of me that looks at the geometry on those cave walls shook its head. Here is where the story turns into the long, slow habit of returning. I went back, not alone, not stupid. Twice with a friend who climbs and thinks like a surveyor. Once with a pair of cavers, who know these hills like a religion. We printed the photos. We drew triangles from the ridges in the background. We checked forgotten mining claims, talked to a retiree who'd mapped sinkholes in the 80s, scrolled scanned newspapers in a college library until our eyes complained. We found mouths plenty. We found blowholes that breathed cool air. We found graffiti that matched the colors from my camera and hands that had written it. We never found the entrance in the last frame. At night, the lost days trickle back, not as pictures, but as pieces of feeling. The sensation of shoulders brushing rock close enough to own you. The sound of water with a shape you don't recognize. Sometimes I sit up in the dark drawing without deciding to, my hand making the quartered circles before my mind can argue. I'll blink and there they are on the page. Lines that don't belong to me. I don't tell this for a punchline or to recruit believers. The world is full of stories that reached for the fantastic and fell into a hole. I tell it because there's a kind of respect we owe the places we love. These mountains are old in a way the numbers don't carry. People dug into them for ore and for saltpeter and for whatever else could be scraped into a cart. People hid in them and starved in them and were saved by them. Caves happen. Shafts happen. Maps are good and incomplete. If you put boots on a path long enough, you'll find things that don't fit neat. A foundation with no house in a place no house should have been. A line of stone where limestone makes no lines. A mouth in a bluff that a map forgot. If you come to one of those and something in you tightens, listen. Mark it from a distance if you must. Drop a pin, walk away. Bring people who know what they're doing if you go back at all. Don't be the person who thinks light. A phone and a nice sense of self will carry you into the earth and back out whole. I still hike. I still sleep outside. I carry more water than I used to and a second headlamp and a stubborn humility that wasn't in my kit before. I send a live track link to my partner and 3 friends. I leave notes that would help a stranger find me without knowing me. I turn around more, 7 days are gone. They might stay that way. Maybe the body keeps what it needs to keep and throws the rest into a well. Maybe it'll come back in the shape of a smell or a chord in a piece of music, or a too bright image that isn't mine. Maybe the mind did exactly what it had to, tucking a thing away where it can't touch. The part of me that still likes to walk alone. If you meet a gap in your own, maybe if you wake where you didn't lie down, and your life has been edited while you slept, be kind to the part of you that's trying to build the bridge. Accept the rational report and the irrational ache. Hold them both. And if one day you're moving along a ridge with your lungs singing and you see a dark door where no door ought to be, treat it like a loaded question. Some answers don't come at a price you want to pay. My name is Isla Kincaid. I'm 31 and I make my living hauling a tripod into places most folks only see on calendars. I shoot dawn. Fog lifting out of ravines, light ribboning through hardwood crowns. The first blue notes of day before the color warms. I grew up in north-central West Virginia. Left for a while and circled back because the ridgelines here feel like memory laid on the land. I know the rules for being alone outside. I keep them. I have to say that up front, because what happened the morning of May 18th, 2023, didn't start with me ignoring common sense. I set out long before first light for a place I'd been scouting on and off for weeks. A tucked-away ravine in the Laurel Fork backcountry, over on the Virginia side of the state line, where the stream bends twice and a shelf of spruce throws needles like confetti onto the water. The forecast promised a temperature inversion and no wind, perfect for fog pooling low. I parked at a pull-off, shouldered 20 pounds of gear, and walked in by headlamp. The forest felt held, like a held breath. Even the creek sounded careful. At the lip of the hollow, I killed the light and let the gray come up around me. Fog rose and sank in slow tides, a quiet machine moving through the understory. I set the tripod legs wide, leveled the head, dialed in a long exposure, and started working. That's the part of the job that is just repetition and attention. Frame, check, adjust, wait. Step 3, paces, start again. I forgot the time like I always do when the world cooperates. The first call came soft enough that I thought it was wind bending around something. Eula? I froze with my hand on the shutter cable. The voice was female. Not close, not far. It had the plain music of someone who says your name without making a point of it. Just Isla, like that's all there is to say. Hello? I said, because of course I did. You okay? Nothing answered. Only the drip of condensation off needles and an occasional click in the brush like a vole, not committing to a direction. I listened until listening became its own noise and then went back to work. A photographer's brain is a basket for mishearing. Wind becomes words. A distant woodpecker turns into a knock you think you recognize. You learn to let that pass through you. The second call came from my right. Same tone, same word. Gila. I pivoted, fog rethreading the trees, and saw no shape, no movement. If someone needs help, say something else, I said louder. Anything. I'll come to you. Silence is one thing. The weight of absence is another. I got the second kind. The fog tightened, the way it does when the air cools a degree. I felt it in my teeth. Then the third call came from behind me. Isla. It landed at the nape of my neck. I swung around fast enough that the tripod trembled. The sound had no place to sit. It seemed to belong to all the space around me. I know how echoes work on rock faces. This wasn't that. It was like the fog had learned my name and was using it. I started packing without admitting to myself that that's what I was doing. Battery out, lens capped, head clamped down, tripod on my shoulder. The pull-off was north-northwest if the map in my head hadn't slipped. I stepped in that direction and felt the large, soft hand of the fog push me half a step to the side. Isla. Not a summons now. Gentle, coaxing, almost relieved. Like I'd finally remembered something I'd promised to do. I took out my phone for the map I download for places with no service. The blue dot skittered like a water strider. The compass app spun as if it were bored with choosing. I carry a small base plate compass on a lanyard for exactly those moments when silicon lies. The needle swung, settled for a heartbeat, then drifted off true. I tapped the housing and watched the north end circle home and wander again like a dog off leash. Isla. The voice fell into a cadence, repeating my name and pausing, repeating and pausing. With the patience of a metronome, my feet began to answer it. One step, then two, involuntary, like the flinch when a doctor taps your knee. The draw of it felt beautiful and wrong at once, like a melody you shouldn't follow into a dark room. I made myself stop. I dug the tripod feet into the leaf litter, jammed the head under my arm, and treated the metal as ballast. No, I said out loud, which is a word for dogs and for fear. No, the fog thickened to cloth. 10 feet was far. Every trunk wore a gray shroud that leaned when I did. And the voice kept saying my name, not raised, not urgent, not angry, inviting. Isla. Time loosened. I don't know how long I stood neither going nor staying, trying to listen past the call to the world beneath it. Somewhere in there I noticed I was walking again. I can't tell you when the decision left and the movement took over. My camera bag felt lighter. When a strap slid off my shoulder, I didn't catch it. I watched it swing down and knock my shin and thought, dimly, that it would be where I left it when I wanted it again. I kept going. The fog thinned as if a lid had come off. I stepped into a clearing without knowing I had been moving toward one. What lay in front of me had once been a burying ground. You could tell by the low stones, fieldstone markers sunk into the slope. The oldest tipped and half swallowed, the newer meaning a century old, standing a little prouder. No fence, no gate, ferns had their hands on everything, and wintergreen milked a sharp smell where it grew between rocks. The voice stopped. The silence felt like when a refrigerator motor cuts out, and you hear the room again. I stood with my hands empty, brain clicking through wrong answers. Why here? Why this? And then I walked to the nearest stone because human beings want names. The carving was shallow. The way it is when someone who loved you had a chisel but not much practice. I made out a date that began with 18 and ended with a number that could have been a 1 or a 4, depending on how the lichen wanted to be read. I found the word infant on another stone and the word daughter on a third. A fourth stone had been burned by time into a toast color and split clean down the middle, so it said nothing anyone living could understand. Isla. The voice was right behind my ear. I spun so hard I staggered. For a breath there was a woman in the fog. She was the shape of a woman, let me say that, because if I start telling you the color of her dress or how her hair fell, I'll be coloring in my fear. A long shape, pale where the fog was pale, an arm moving toward me like reaching is what it had always done, and then there was nothing but air and fern smell, in the sense that I had almost been somewhere I didn't want to be. The pull that had been leading me went slack. I felt it like a cast line going dead in my hand. Fight came back into me as if it had been waiting its turn. Turned that fight into direction. Away, any away, now. I ran with all the grace of a tripod hauler who'd dropped her bag. The forest turned into the kind that only gives you one place to put your foot. And I put my foot there, then the next there, teeth bared, eyes watering. Branches took small pieces of me as I went past. Rocks rolled and I rolled with them. I didn't shout. Animals shout. I kept my breath in my chest and used it for running. I came out onto a gravel line I hadn't planned for. A forest. Service road with 2 ditches full of last night's rain, and a culvert whose numbering told me more than my compass had. The fog had torn into flags by then, and the ridge beyond the road stood up where I could see it. I knew roughly where the pull-off sat relative to that ridge. I walked fast in that direction with my hands shaking, and then ran again because walking felt like an apology. My truck was where I'd left it and looked indecently normal. I got in, locked the doors, habit, not logic, and put my forehead on the wheel. After a stretch of not moving and not thinking, I drove back down to the small ranger station near the pavement and told the first person in a uniform I saw that I needed help retrieving gear. I did not tell him a fog had pressed my name against my ear. He would have been kind, but we both would have had less to work with. We hiked in around midday, the ranger and I, following my track back only because you can't follow fog. The sun had punched holes in the shade. The hollow looked like a place anyone would be lucky to spend a morning. We found my camera bag a quarter-mile shy of where I'd left the tripod. The tripod leaned against a red spruce like it had chosen to rest. My headlamp hung from a twig at shoulder height, which made no sense at all. I had no memory of unclipping it and hanging it, and no reason to have done so. The ranger asked if I wanted to keep looking for that old cemetery you mentioned. I told him not today. He made a note for himself and did not push. Back home, I did what you do when something strange has its hand on your shoulder. I looked for the part of it that belongs to paper. I dug through county records and a tangle of digitized newspapers and a book about Allegheny settlement patterns that I had once used to lull myself to sleep. It took 2 nights and a call to a historical society that only answers at odd hours. But I found it. A note in a surveyor's journal from 1831 that mentioned a burying field near the East Fork and the Vale family lot, and a scattered set of later references to the Vale woman who called children through the mist. Her name shows up as Temperance Vale in a church ledger, 26 at the time of her death. 1 son dead of fever the winter before, according to a list of burials copied out by a pastor with a careful hand. A scribbled remark in the margin, hard to read. Ink bled by time, says she walked the creek in search and called their names. Another item 20 years later, from a man who claimed he heard a woman's voice in a white weather and went after it long enough to get turned around. He wrote that 2 men vanished on that ridge sometime after the Vale lot fell out of use, and that older folk caution not to answer if your name is caught up in the fog. Most of that is story layered on story, but stories are a kind of evidence when enough people keep telling them. I could stop there and let it be a piece of local lore I had the bad luck to walk into. I could tell you it was acoustics in my own tired mind, that photons in fog scatter and throw sound odd ways, that magnets misbehave in pockets of ore, that a name spoken once by someone real can seem to come from everywhere if the world is soft enough to carry it. All of that is true. It does not take away the part where I almost stepped forward because something in me wanted to. I will not shoot that hollow again. There are places I have marked as off-limits for light, not because they lack beauty, but because something in them asks a question I don't want to answer. This one went on that list. When a client asked for Laurel Fork Fog specifically, I gave them 3 other valleys that do the trick, and promised they would never know the difference. Since that morning, my rules have changed in small ways that feel large when I'm alone. I clip my compass to a belt loop, not a lanyard. I carry an old-fashioned whistle and use it to remind myself I have a voice that belongs to me. I leave a breadcrumb of reflective tape at trail junctions before dawn, when the world can tilt. I answer no voice I didn't invite. If I need to say a name in the woods, I say my own first under my breath, a way of pulling myself back into the center of my skull. If you ever find yourself in low country, where the fog gathers like it has a job, and you hear your name said in a tone that fits you as if it learned you, count slowly to 10 and do nothing else. Look down. Your feet will tell you more than the air. If your compass won't keep north, treat your last known bearing like a gift and backtrack to it, even if that means missing the shot that made you set an alarm in the dark. If you step into a clearing and find stones with no fence and names that look like the earth is still trying to hold them, say thank you and leave. The mountains keep 2 kinds of records, the ones in a drawer at the courthouse and the ones the weather knows. When those 2 speak at once, let them have the last word. People ask sometimes if I think it was a ghost. I don't know what that word buys you. Something called my name in a way that felt like it had the right to. It led me toward a place where loss once lived with its shoes on. It would have kept me if I'd let it. If Temperance Vale was real, and the paper says she was, then her voice is part of the weather out there now, stitched into fog the way a song gets stuck in your head. Maybe grief repeats itself wherever it can. Maybe the land learned her and sometimes tries her on. I can tell you the feel of it. That's the only truth I've got. A name around me from every side, patience in the syllables, the small surrender of stepping because stepping would be easier than standing. And then the refusal, mine, finally mine. The turn and the run and the gravel underfoot like an answer. The quiet afterward. The way the woods look the day after a thing like that. Exactly as they did before. Which is not the same at all. My name is Evan Rourke, and I've been a forest ranger in the Allegheny Highlands of Western Virginia for 8 years. I've pulled lost kids out of rhododendron thickets, broken up drunken campfire parties, hauled a black bear out of a dumpster, and flagged more illegal tree stands than I care to count. I thought I understood the kinds of danger these mountains could hold. September of 2020 cured me of that. What happened on a routine night patrol made me see that the worst thing you can meet in the woods isn't wearing fur, it's wearing a face like yours. I was covering a midnight to 8 shift at an old steel fire tower on a long, wind-battered ridge. In drought, we staff it around the clock, scanning for that first thread of smoke. The night was clear and cold enough for your breath to show, the moon fat and bright. From the cab, I could see 1,000 ripples of hardwood canopy, pale where the light hit, black where it pooled in drainages. Around 2:30 a.m., a pinpoint of orange opened on the northeastern horizon, about 4 miles out. It held steady, flickered, then brightened like someone fed fresh fuel. That basin had been closed to camping all month. Dangerously dry fuels, red flag warnings posted at every kiosk. An open flame out there wasn't just a ticket. It was potential catastrophe. I called it in, gave coordinates, signed out of the tower and headed downslope with a pack. Water, med kit, camera, citation book, and a laminated copy of the closure order. The approach was a mix of old roadbed and faint trail, the undergrowth loud with late summer katydids and my own footfalls. I made enough noise not to surprise anyone, but not so much that I'd announce my exact location. Backcountry contacts can go sideways. I've had people cry, argue, and once pull a knife. You learn to arrive deliberate, not timid. The camp sat in a small flat beside a laurel-choked creek. A ring of stones, flames licking higher than any Leave No Trace pamphlet would approve. A two-person tent stood with its front flap slightly open. A backpack leaned against a maple. A small stove, a titanium mug, a pair of trail runners half under the vestibule. It looked utterly ordinary until it didn't. No voices, no movement, no headlamp beams swinging through nylon. I called out, "Ranger, coming in." Nothing. I took 3 steps closer and aimed my light into the tent. At first, my brain told me it was a shadow stain. Then the smell caught up, a metallic wetness beneath wood smoke. The sleeping bag was dark where it should have been blue. Fresh dark. I crouched and touched the fabric with a gloved finger. It came away slick. The bag's top was folded oddly, as if the occupant had tried to get out in a hurry and hadn't made it far. My chest went tight. I backed out, keyed my radio, and asked dispatch for immediate backup and law enforcement. Then I forced myself to slow down and do the next thing right. There was a scuffed path in the leaf litter leading away from the tent. A flat, dragged look to it that you don't get from careful feet. Broken fern fronds pointed like arrows toward the creek. 20 yards in, a smear on a rock. 10 yards past that, a place where the ground was torn as if someone had tried to anchor themselves and been pulled anyway. I took photos as I went. Wide, medium, tight, my hand steady because it had to be. The drag ended at the lip of the cut bank above the water. When I swept the beam downward, it hung on fabric snagged on alder branches. A jacket sleeve torn nearly off, a damp baseball cap. One hiking boot lying on its side in the gravel, as if someone's foot had vanished out of it. I slid down using roots for holds, moved with care and kept my ears open for breath. A whimper, anything. Water muttered over stones. The woods listened back. In the shallows, I found a phone spiderwebbed with cracks. A few feet downstream, I found a lighter, a tube of lip balm, and the top flap from the backpack, yanked hard enough to rip the seam. There were streaks on nearby rocks that the creek hadn't had time to wash thin. Dispatch said backup was 40 minutes out. The nearest unit had been on the far side of the district. 40 minutes might as well have been 4 hours. I searched both directions along the creek until the beam showed only water and glimmer and my own footprints. Turning up the bank to try again, the first, sheriff's deputy, and 2 rangers reached me a little after 3:15. We cleared the immediate area for safety and then widened the search. More sign turned up. Broken branches at shoulder height like someone had been hauled through, fingernail scrapes on a beech trunk, a small spray of blood at face level that said impact. Across the creek we found fresh tire tracks cutting into a gated logging road. The gate's chain hung bright with a new cut. Someone had driven in, likely with lights off, had business, and had exited without wanting witnesses. By dawn, we had the camp secured with tape and a staging area set. In daylight, the ordinary ugliness of the site bloomed into detail. The tent held a wallet and driver's license in a side pocket. Maya Pierce, 23, from Maryland. There was a notebook with itineraries and mileage estimates. A satellite map printed and folded to the basin we stood in. A small first aid kit open and half used. She had done most things right. Her last Instagram post, recovered later, showed her by the fire with the caption, "Day 9. The quiet feels like a blanket. See you tomorrow, world. Timestamp 9:12 p.m. The smashed phone coughed up data once our text breathed on it. The final video file, 1:47 a.m., started on a blank shot of nylon ceiling and a voice whispering, fast and breathy, "Someone's outside." The zipper sound on the recording made my shoulders climb. A male voice muffled by the tent wall said, "Come on out. I just want to talk." There was a scrape of fabric, a squeal of metal against metal like something pried. Maya's hands flitted into the frame, shaking, trying to text. The words "no service" in the upper corner. The small sound she made when that message didn't change. Then shouting. A tangle of noise, the phone skidding across ground to show a smear of firelight and stars. The feed cut. State police, the Bureau, and our agency's investigators moved fast. That basin is a maze of spurs and paralleling tracks. They mapped everyone. The tire impressions matched a common off-road tire, which would have been helpful if half the county didn't drive them. We canvassed the road junctions, pulled camera footage from gas stations out to 80 miles, logged every pickup driving through between midnight and dawn. The victimology unit combed missing persons reports within a 5-year radius and flagged 3 hikers whose cases had gone cold. The working theory: someone had been living rough in the forest long enough to learn patterns, watching trailheads and campsites, selecting targets who were alone, moving at night. 3 weeks later, a state trooper pulled over a gray SUV for crossing the center line on a back road 60 miles from the crime scene. The driver, Brent Holloway, 41, was quiet, polite, and sweating in 55-degree air. The trooper saw spatter on the door seam and the edge of a tarp stuffed under a duffel. Probable cause led to a search. The search led to hell. In the cargo area, a coil of cut chain, bolt cutters, camping gear that didn't match the brands he carried receipts for, and a camera worth more than anything else in the vehicle. The camera body registered to Maya. DNA, later lifted from the SUV's interior, matched the blood from the campsite and the creek rocks. A storage tub in the back held a Ziploc with hair ties, earrings, a folded paper map with 3 basins circled in red. It also held a driver's license that didn't belong to Maya. I was there the morning investigators walked Holloway's camps. He'd been drifting for months, maybe years, changing drainages, staying a few days at each site, caching gear and ammo cans tucked into blowdowns or pushed into culverts along closed roads. He knew where gates were and how to cut chains without being seen. He'd made blinds near trail junctions, just low screens of brush where you could lie in wait and watch hikers pass a few yards away without ever seeing you. Under one tarp, they found a plastic tub of batteries and 2 trail cameras with their cards wiped. Under another, a bin full of women's clothing in sizes that trended small. Evidence technicians moved like surgeons. The rest of us stood back and tried not to throw up coffee. Holloway copped to 3 abductions as part of a plea that put him away without parole and spared families a trial. He led investigators to 2 graves in remote cuts in another county, and then a third in a rock pile near a national forest boundary line where dogs had already alerted the week prior. Maya's body was recovered 73 miles from where I first saw her firelight. She had fought hard. The autopsy said blunt force injuries and strangulation. It also said defensive wounds deep enough to leave his DNA in her skin. That mattered. It meant she marked him. It meant the evidence chain had her voice in it too. Since that night, I hear zippers differently. I hear quiet differently. When I'm on patrol and I spot a glow where no glow should be, I don't think ticket. I think I'm walking into someone's deliberate plan, and I treat it like a hot call. I knock on tents with my back foot planted and my radio already keyed. I remind solo backpackers to carry a satellite messenger, not because the forest is mean, but because people can be. When folks roll their eyes at closure signs, I tell them about a cut chain in a dark road and how fast intention can turn into harm. I've replayed the math 1,000 times. If I'd left the tower 10 minutes earlier, if I'd taken the lower spur instead of the ridge line, if I'd jogged that last grade instead of walking it in. You can eat yourself alive with if. Here's what I know. Maya did most of it right. She told friends where she'd be. She had a map, a plan, and gear. She camped away from the road. She still met a man who chose a place without witnesses and made a night into a weapon. Predators pick geography the way a hunter picks a blind. People ask what to do to be safe, and they want the list to make certainty. Doesn't. But here's mine anyway. Tell 2 people exactly where you'll be and when you'll check in. Leave the plan on your dashboard, not your social feed. Don't post geotagged stories in real time from a campsite. Carry a SAT communicator or PLB, and put it on your body at night, not hanging on the tent wall. Camp out of sight of roads and obvious spurs. If a vehicle engine starts up near a closed road at 1 a.m., that is not your cue to ignore it. Move. If something feels wrong, if you get that animal prickle on your neck, you don't owe the woods your itinerary. Break camp. Go. You can come back another time when the world doesn't feel like it's leaning toward you in a way you don't like. If you work in these places, as a ranger, A volunteer, a trail maintainer, treat small violations like possible smoke from a larger fire. An illegal campfire might be a careless kid with marshmallows. It might also be the last warm photo on a stranger's phone. Check gates, walk closed roads, log the fresh tire tracks even when you're tired. Push for cameras where it makes sense and for funding when it doesn't. We're here to protect land, yes, but also the people who love it. I still climb the tower on clear nights. The view is what you think. Endless ridges like backs of sleeping animals. A moon that never remembers to be timid. Stars that look close enough to pluck. I scan for smoke, and sometimes I think I see a tiny ember far off and my gut seizes until it's nothing. Other times it is something. And I put a pack on my shoulders and walk into dark trees toward a flicker only I can see. I walk faster now. I don't tell myself stories about how it's probably nothing. I have a different story, and it doesn't end with probably. It ends with a name I won't forget and a fire that wasn't about warmth at all. The woods aren't bad. The woods are just the woods. Wind in oak crowns sounds like ocean. Salamanders hide under stones with orange backs like fallen leaves. A barred owl makes a noise that will make you laugh out loud even if you're alone. Most nights out here are the kind that make you want to write a thank you note to no one in particular. But in the silence under all that, there are also people who look at the same map and see opportunity in the places where help takes an hour to arrive. That's the part I carry now alongside the beauty. I was 30 minutes late for a stranger I never met. That's the wait. The lesson is what I do with it from here. So I keep watch. I ask one more question at the trailhead. I respond to one more weird report that would have sounded like paranoia before. And when I see a glow where no glow belongs, I don't assume it's s'mores. I assume it's a reason to move. My name is Elian, and this is the night 6 hours disappeared while I stood 30 steps from people who swear I was gone for 20 minutes. I was 25 that summer, 2021, and finishing my last quarter of grad school. A handful of us planned a send-off in the northern Pennsylvania mountains, the kind of weekend where you cook on real flame and fall asleep smelling like smoke. We chose a designated backcountry site in Teodotin State Forest, quiet but reachable, a notch past easy and a notch shy of hard, just right for a mixed group that included one trail runner and one person who still called their hiking shoes sneakers. There were 6 of us, me, my best friend Jonah, his partner Lark, a sarcastic EMT named Pry, our resident gear nerd Dev, and quiet, observant Sloan, who could identify trees at night by the feel of their bark. We reached the site late Friday afternoon, dropped packs and did the satisfying camp routine. Poles up, stakes down, lines tight. Someone found a perfect stick for hot dogs. Someone else found a downed limb soft enough to carve marshmallow skewers. The sky turned the clean blue it only gets after heat breaks, and by the time the first star punched through, we were full and smug and exactly the kind of content you take photos of to remember later. By midnight, the fire was low and whispering. Just embers with a lick of flame here and there. Most everyone drifted off. Only Jonah and I stayed up, nursing the kind of aimless conversation you only have when there isn't a clock glowing anywhere. Around 12:30, I told him I was going to step into the trees. He made a joke about mountain lions not liking spicy food, raised 2 fingers in a lazy salute, and scooted closer to the warmth. I slid my headlamp on, took my flashlight anyway. Redundancy was a habit, and walked just far enough to give the campsite its privacy. I didn't go more than 50 yards. I could still feel the fire's ghost heat on my back when I picked a spot behind a big hemlock, took care of business, and turned to go. That's when my simple night thinned into something else. I lifted my light and expected to see a low orange dome where the fire was. I saw only trunks and black. No glow, no human sound. It was as if someone had put a lid over the world. I adjusted my angle. Maybe I'd veered around that windfall and lost a straight line. 10 steps, 20, still no evidence of camp. The air felt oddly dense, the way it does just before a storm, except the leaves weren't moving. Cicadas, which had been sawing away all evening, had gone dead quiet. I stopped and called in a normal voice, not wanting to wake the whole forest. Jonah? The sound didn't travel the way sound should. I heard my own name swallowed by trees, as if there was too much room for it to get lost in. Didn't carry back to me, didn't bounce. I raised my voice. Hey, answer me. Nothing. Not even our creak, not even a breeze. And it isn't that I heard silence. I heard the absence of the small things that add up to a night. That's a different creature. I forced myself to do the practical things. I clicked my headlamp to high. I checked that the backup was in my pocket. I pulled my phone to open the compass app, a silly belt and suspenders step, given I could feel the slope of the land and knew our tent sat on a little bench on the downside of the ridge. That's when the first impossible fact arrived almost casually, like the way your brain notices the color of a shirt a friend is wearing. The lock screen said 6:47 a.m. I stared at it dumbly and then unlocked, thinking I'd changed the time zone or the date. Saturday, June 19th. My throat went dry. I had stepped away at 12:30 something, no more than 10 minutes ago by any real measure. 6+ hours is sunrise and coffee. I looked up and the dark around me didn't look like morning dark. It looked like the middle of night dark. There was no pale line in the east. There were no robins starting up their glass marble song. Okay, I said out loud, the way you talk yourself through fainting on a hot day. You walked in a circle. Go left until you hit the log, then right until your own footprints show up. I swept the light in a slow arc, searching for what felt familiar. The slumped shape of Jonah's pack by the fire ring, the reflective glint of a tent guy line. And then abruptly, I was standing in camp. I recognized our trunks, our little patch of flat ground, the fire ring we'd tidied, the orientation of our tents. Except it looked wrong in a way that made my stomach jump. Ash piled in the ring like gray snow, drifted into a cone with no pink core, a texture cold fires make after rain and time. Leaves and fine needles lay on my tent fly where there shouldn't have been any yet. The fold-out table we'd set near the ring had a thin skim of dust on its black surface, the kind you can write your finger through. My mind did the quick, desperate shuffle we all do in the face of wrongness. Did a storm pass while I was turned around? Did we walk away? I yanked open Jonah's tent. No sleeping bag, no pad, no pile of his usual mess. The next tent the same, the next empty nylon rooms, smelling faintly of polyester and resin. My light shook. So did my hands. I shouted until my throat hurt, each name a flare that didn't bloom into anything. Jonah! Lark, pry! I ran a short circle and called again. In one direction, trees stood like an audience that didn't care. In the other, trees stood the same. Voices cut through the dark. Real voices, multiple, urgent, right where voices should be if they were coming from the trail. Elian! Where are you? Eli, answer. I spun the light toward them so hard I made myself dizzy, and a cluster of beams swung through the understory. Jonah came first, hair flattened by his beanie, eyes too big. Behind him the rest, panting, looking half angry, half terrified. They crowded me, hands on my arms, their lights in my face. The relief that hit me felt like gravity coming back after a long fall. Where did you go? Jonah asked. You said you would be right back. It's been 20 minutes. 20 minutes. My voice cracked. I started to say I'd been walking for hours, that everything here looked like we'd deserted it months ago. But when I swung my light at the tents, the debris was gone. The fire had fire again. Real flame, fresh wood throwing off a hungry crackle exactly like we'd left it. Our table was black plastic, not dusted gray. Someone's enamel mug sat where it had been, with the caffeinated ring still wet inside. I couldn't find a seam in the world where this version ended and the other began. I held out my phone like a proof I wasn't crazy. Look at the time. 12:51 a.m., Friday. The number changed as we watched, 12:52. It rolled forward obediently like a normal minute in a normal night. I couldn't tell if my chest hurt from running or from the sudden cliff my sense of reality had fallen off. They got me back to the fire, wove me into a cocoon of practical kindness, blanket over shoulders, bottle of water tapped against my knee until I remembered to hold it. I was shaking so hard the cap clicked against my teeth. Tell us what happened, Pry said, using the calm voice she saves for unstable strangers. I said I got turned around, that I couldn't see the glow, that when I found my way back, the camp was abandoned. I told them about the fire that looked like it had been cold for a long while, about the film on the table, about tents that were tents, but not rooms. I told them about the silence that wasn't just quiet, but the subtraction of living noise. No one called me a liar. But I watched the set of their mouths do the thing mouths do when they put something in a drawer labeled weird, probably stress. We didn't pack out. We weren't going to try to hike 6 miles to the trailhead after midnight by headlamp, with bats of fear beating around in someone's chest. We sat up, all of us, because even the people who didn't feel rattled weren't going to leave me to the dark. The night crept on minute by minute, and I sat there counting them with the compulsion of someone who wants a thing to behave. At 6:22 a.m., a pale sliver grew in the trees exactly where a pale sliver should grow in June. Birds made their beginner noises like they were practicing being birds. The morning smelled like water and leaves and coffee. My body unlocked a notch. I wasn't okay, but the world had resumed. We did the thing you do, tease the weird until it shrinks. Dev tried a few jokes about alternate timelines where we forgot extra fuel. Sloan said gently, "Forrest messes with perspective all the time," as if perspective alone could paint dust on plastic. The conversation moved back to normal trip talk. Who brought too much, who brought too little, who snored. I nodded in the right places and stowed panic like a bear canister. We stayed the second night because everyone but me wanted to, and because leaving right then felt like admitting the woods could push us. Nothing else happened. The creek ran. A barred owl made the sound that always makes me laugh. We ate too many s'mores and I pretended I could sleep, eyes open. Hand on my watch like a kid with a new toy he's scared to lose. At dawn Sunday, we broke down camp. As I unclipped my rainfly, my fingers slowed. On the back panel, the side that had faced the understory, there was a faint film none of the other sides had, a fine grit that only clings to fabric that stood a while. You had to hold it at an angle to see it. I snapped photos no one else would find interesting. In the pictures, it looked like dirt. In my head, it looked like ghost-proof. Back home, I did what people like me do when something resists sense. I researched until the search itself felt like superstition. I read about missing time reports from hunters and truckers and one botanist in Scotland. I read neurological papers about temporal perception, dissociation, micro-seizures, the way stress can dilate or compress subjective experience. I found campfire forum posts about the dead zones in certain hollows, where compasses wobble, and GPS units scatter position fixes like handfuls of BBs. None of it fit cleanly. None of it explained how I could be gone 20 minutes by every device I wore, while remembering 6 hours of walking through a place where sound wouldn't stick. Then there were the artifacts. My fitness band, always collecting, always judging, had a clean gap from 12:31 to 12:51. No steps, no heart rate, as if my skin had been stone. My phone's logs showed the same. Activity at 12:31, then nothing until 12:51, with the battery percentage unchanged across the void. My watch hands hadn't stopped, but when I looked later, I realized the loom paint at the tips, useless detail, had a hairline crack like glass spider webbing after a sharp tap. Why did I even notice that? Because my brain was greedy for anything I could hold. Ask me to tell you what happened, and I can tell you what it felt like. It felt as if I'd walked across a seam in the air and stepped into a room where time had a different thickness. It felt as if our campsite existed in 2 versions at once, the living one and a dust-coated one, and I had stood inside the wrong one just long enough to be terrified. It felt like someone had turned the forest's volume all the way down and unplugged the clock. Ask me for advice, and I have some, though I hate that I do. Don't go into the trees at night alone if you can help it. Not because something with claws is waiting, but because you might bump the soft rules that keep the world ordinary. If you must go, carry 2 lights and put a whistle where you can find it without looking. Clip a satellite communicator to your belt instead of dropping it on the camp table. Trust the part of your mind that stiffens when the forest stops making sense. If the glow you expect isn't where it should be, call out quickly, and then walk toward your own footprints, even if you feel silly. If your devices show nonsense, or worse, nothing at all, don't talk yourself into rationalizing. Come back to people. Sit down by flame. Count minutes out loud if you need to hear time behave. I still camp. I still love that moment at dusk when trees go from green to ink. I still like waking up cold and pulling the quilt to my chin, hearing the small sounds that say you're far from any road. But I stay closer to the group after dark. I keep a tiny analog watch on a string around my neck and check it against my phone. Not because that will save me if the forest wants to turn itself inside out again, but because looking at two ticking things makes me breathe slower. When I feel the urge to wander off with my headlamp, I picture ash stacked like gray dunes in a cold ring, and I sit back down. There are people who will read this and tilt their heads and say, "Gently or not, sleep deprivation, anxiety, you scared yourself." Maybe I did. Maybe that's the most merciful version of events. But there are hollows in these old mountains that keep older rules. And sometimes those rules lean hard enough that you notice. 20 minutes can be long enough to convince you morning has already come and gone. 6 hours can live in your memory with the weight of fact, even if your watch swears otherwise. If you ever feel time slant under your feet, don't try to prove anything. Don't try to be brave. Come back to the circle of light while the circle is still the one you left. My name is Rowan, and I'm a ham radio operator. If you've never messed with the hobby, picture this. A box of knobs and hiss, a length of wire tossed into the sky, and a human voice riding the atmosphere like a skipped stone. No cell towers, no routers, just ionized air doing old magic. I've been licensed 12 years, and while I've spoken with people from Alaska to the Azores from my desk at home, what I love most is going portable. Strapping a small station to my back and hiking it somewhere high enough that the wind feels like a current you can swim. In late August of 2022, I mapped a 3-day trip into the Laurel Ridge backcountry of southwestern Pennsylvania, close cousin to the Appalachian spine. All dark runs and sandstone ledges and hemlocks that smell like rain. I planned to climb 6 miles to a narrow ridge where a bald opened the sky in every direction. A perfect takeoff angle for a wire dipole, a better one for a human mood. My pack was split half ordinary camping gear, half radio, ultralight tent, quilt, stove, food, then a small HF transceiver wrapped in a bandana, 50 feet of coax, a Life PO4 battery, a pencil-thin solar panel, and a cut-to-length dipole coiled like a pet snake. It felt ridiculous and exactly right clattering in my bag. I pushed up through oak and laurel tunnels, then climbed steep stone stairs set by trail crews with a sense of humor, and reached the ridge a little after 1 in the afternoon. The place was everything I'd hoped. Shoulder-high grass and a crown of stunted pines bent by winter wind. I pitched the tent on the lee side, then threw a line over a branch with a bright orange throw bag, hoisted the center of the dipole until it sagged into a lazy V, and tied the legs off to 2 saplings. The coax kissed into the radio. Battery in. SWR check good. The old ritual felt like church to me. Assemble, tune, listen. Contacts came quick. Ohio, Georgia. A guy named Dan in coastal Maine who said he could hear the wind around me like surf. I logged in pencil and sipped stream water I'd filtered cold. Nothing tastes like water after a climb. By dusk, the ridge had turned the color of worn copper. I ate noodles out of a pot and watched deer step across the bald like ghosts rehearsing a scene. Night is when the bands unfurl. The D layer settles down, the upper layers lean the right way, and signals start taking long rides. I slid into my tent with the radio and a headlamp, and let the hiss and burble fill the small space until the fabric seemed to breathe. It happened a little after 9. I'd been sweeping slowly across 20 meters when a whisper of voice flashed and vanished. Not a clean call, not the bright edges of a strong station, more like something pressed through gauze. I tuned back, easing the dial until the syllables gathered into shape. The voice was male, a little breathless, sitting right at the edge of noise. "Anyone copy? This is K45XRY calling. Anyone, please? K45XRY, I frowned. US call signs don't work like that. 2 numbers and a 5 in the wrong place. The construction was a near miss, an echo of the real system. But the fear in the voice cut through my pedantry. "This is K3RWN portable," I said, thumb on the push to talk. "You're weak but readable, K4. 5XRY, what's your location? What's your situation?" Her static rose and then settled in a hush, as if the noise itself were listening. The voice came back clearer, but with the kind of tremor you hear in someone trying to speak around a bad thought. Thank God. I think I'm in Kentucky, eastern side. I went off trail. I can't get back. It's getting dark again. Something's wrong with the woods. Can you give me coordinates? I said. Do you have a GPS phone? Any landmark, creek, fire tower, road noise? Over. A long breath hissed through. My phone won't hold a signal. The compass spins. I keep walking, but everything pushes in. The trees are too close together. Doesn't match the map. There's light up ahead. I think there's a camp. I'm going to it. Hold position if you can, I said. Light could be deceptive. Tell me exactly what you see, over. Leaves brushed his microphone. A snag snapped. The voice came back thinner, as if distance had opened between us in 10 seconds. No, that isn't a fire. It's white. It's moving toward me. Oh God, no, back off. Stay. His words crushed into a wet crackle. The sound a signal makes when something tears it sideways. I sat up hard in the tent, the fabric popping with the motion, and jammed the gain and RF filters in with muscle memory. K45XRY, say again. Do you copy? Do you copy? I edged a little higher in frequency, then lower, chasing the melt of his last syllable. Nothing but ionospheric sigh. I could have called it a hoax. I could have convinced myself the mind invents drama when the night provides too much canvas. But I've logged thousands of contacts. There's a smell to certain kinds of voices, and this one carried the copper of real fear. I stayed on frequency, calling, then listening, then calling again, for nearly an hour until 3 things happened at once. My battery dropped to the point where the radio threw a polite little tantrum and shut itself off. My headlamp told me the second set of AAAs were done thinking about me, and wind slid across the bald in a way that made the tent skin against my cheek. Sleep was a rumor. I lay there listening to the fabric tick like a clock, and to the animal noises the brain makes when it's sorting a thing it doesn't want. Around 2, I gave up and turned the radio back on, nursing the battery. I scanned for the voice. Nothing. I drifted into 20 meters and found a group of night owls in Wisconsin trading weather and jokes. I said hello, said I was portable, said the sky was clear where I was and that I could smell autumn arriving like a thought you almost have. My voice sounded normal. At 3, I reached for logic. It's what you do when the world leans. I'd cached the FCC database to my phone. The whole call sign registry, all the vanity plates and renewals, because I like knowing exactly who I'm talking to when someone throws a new suffix at me. The backcountry had robbed the phone of any connection to towers, but the local file opened like a book. K45XRY didn't exist. No active license, no expired one, no vanity. I tried the natural mishears K4SXRY, K5XRY, K45XR, and caught tumbleweeds. I thumbed over to the historical calls. Licenses issued by the old districts when suffixes had a different flavor. And there, tucked between 2 lines that made sense, was something that didn't. K45XRY, assigned 1987. Licensee Devon Hollow, City, Asherlin. Cuba canceled 1989. Asherlin is a smear of town where Kentucky's green goes dark and folded. I'd driven through it one October to see leaves and a coal tipple. The name sat in my head like a rock you can't spit out. I had 1 bar of battery left on the phone, and a sliver of stubbornness left in me. I searched the old newspapers I'd saved to read offline on rainy days, because I'm the sort of person who downloads the past for company. I found him in 3 sentences in the Laurel County Ledger. October 1989. Davin Dave Hollow, 43, known locally as an amateur radio operator, failed to return from a 3-day solo hike. A multi-agency search located no remains. Foul play not suspected. Family requests privacy. It was the kind of nothing sentence that tries to tell you something by not saying it. I stared at the date. I listened to the wind. I told myself large countries breed coincidences, and that the brain loves to make maps out of clouds. When the ridge let go of its black and started turning slate, I broke camp. I hadn't planned to hike out that day, but the idea of staying sat wrong in my ribs. The bald gave me one cool, obliging breeze that smelled of stone, as if to say we were fine with each other, and only the human piece of the night had tilted. I rolled my wire, packed the radio, and shouldered the pack. As I turned to take a last look at the trees, something caught the first light and flashed like a wink 50 yards off the trail. If you spend enough time outside, you learn the difference between natural glint and human glint. This was the second kind. I walked toward it, pushing through laurel until my shins itched. The thing sat hunched under leaves and soil like a hibernating animal. I brushed away a wet mat of oak and found a radio. It was an old handheld late 80s era, the kind you'd clip to your belt like a brick and feel important. The metal was pitted. The rubber parts had gone sticky, then turned to rock. The battery, one of those pack styles no one makes anymore, had split its seam and bled crystals. I said its brand name out loud, Yaisu, because sometimes saying a name will protect you from the thing you're saying. I skimmed my fingers through the leaf litter, careful, like handling a nest. There was a canteen with a dent near the lip, a nylon shoulder bag falling into threads. Near the bag, half moth-eaten leather. My thumb slid open the old wallet as if it were my own. Inside, a plastic card. The photo had surrendered some of its ink to time, but the smile still held. Dave & Hollow, issued 1987. I took photos and nothing else. I felt a strong, specific admonition not to move a thing, as if the woods had certain lines I wasn't meant to cross, and I was already standing on one. I packed my radio like it was glass I cared about and hiked down without stopping. The trail felt longer than it had on the way up. At the first parking pull-off with bars, I called the Ranger District. My voice was steadier than I expected. The dispatcher's voice had the shape of someone who has heard everything before and expects to hear it again. By noon, a ranger met me at the station with the carefully attentive look good officers have, the one that says they'll treat your account like a valuable thing until a fact tells them not to. I explained how I'd triangulated nothing and found something anyway. I showed the photos. He asked for my exact location and I gave him tree shapes and a guess at bearing. He took 2 colleagues and made fast time. They called me late in the day. They'd found the handheld in the bag and more. Shreds of fabric, corroded zipper teeth. Farther under the leaves, bones softened by 30-odd winters, scattered and half-buried and yet somehow waiting. The official ledger would later say what it says in this kind of case. Likely exposure. No indication of criminal involvement. The ranger who'd called me sounded tired and a little sad with the good outcome of a bad story. Family's been notified, he said. It's a relief for them to have a place to put flowers. I asked because I had to, whether the radio I'd found could have been used to transmit anything. He said the battery had died decades ago. The internals were a mess of oxidation, and in any event, the frequency I'd reported operating on wasn't even allocated to hams in 1989. He was kindly puzzled that I would ask. I do not subscribe to every ghost offered to me. I am a practical person who believes in solder joints and lightning arresters, and that you should trim your dipole legs an inch at a time. But the world is old and complicated, and radio is older and more complicated than any of us admit. When we slap call signs on vanity plates, I still go portable. I still throw wire into the sky and talk with strangers whose weather becomes mine for 6 minutes. But I haven't returned to that ridge. On quiet evenings at home, when the house sighs and the cat knocks something down in the next room, and the bands open in a way that makes the hair on your arms lift, I sometimes turn the VFO across 20 meters and hear a voice I don't want to hear. It isn't always there. Sometimes weeks pass and all I hear are Brazilian nets and a kid in Idaho showing off his new microphone. But every so often, tucked between a couple from Quebec laughing about tomatoes and an old-timer in Virginia bragging on his backyard vertical, a thread of sound slips through like light under a door. Anyone copy? This is K45XRY. Anyone? I don't answer anymore. I listen, because listening feels like honoring. And then I spin the dial a fraction and let the hiss reclaim it. Some calls I've decided are not meant to be resolved. Some messages belong to the strange architecture of the air, repeating along paths we don't chart. Maybe a human voice thrown hard against the sky in panic leaves a dent the way a meteor leaves a burn. Maybe the ionosphere keeps a scar like a memory. Maybe on certain nights with certain solar conditions in certain years, the past lifts and asks us again to do the impossible. We place such faith in the present tense. We sit under stars older than we can say and tell ourselves time moves in a line. Then a dead battery whispers from a frequency it never knew, and you realize the air above our heads is an archive and an ocean, And sometimes a man walking alone into a cold night in 1989 finds his way back to your tent by riding a wave you can't see. If you hear him, and you will know if it's him, remember his wife got flowers 33 years late. Remember the Rangers carried a small bundle of bones out of Laurel with their hats off. Then do the hardest thing a person with a mic can do. Let go. There are plenty of calls you should always answer. The ones from clear throats, the ones with coordinates and fear you can quantify, the ones you can hand to people with boots and maps. But if you are running wire through trees somewhere high, and the night thins and the air grows luminous with possibilities, and a voice that isn't quite of now whispers a call sign shaped almost right, consider this permission to hold your breath and keep your hand off the key. The mountains keep their own logs. The sky keeps another, and every so often the pages overlap, and a lost line from one finds its way into the other. Asking again for a copy. We can bear witness, we can listen, and we can carry a little of the weight of a voice that went out once and never came home. My name is Mara, and this is about the weekend I went back to a place I loved and learned exactly how fragile a person can be when the nearest porch light is 8 miles of rutted road away. The cabin wasn't new to me. It was stitched into my childhood. My grandfather built it in the late 60s on a ridge above the Hiawassee River Basin, where hardwoods close in tight and whip-poor wills sound like they're calling from your pocket. Summers meant blackberry stains, iron skillets, and the thunk of the old hand pump. Then adulthood ate my calendar. I hadn't been up there in 5 years when my grandmother died in 2020 and left me the deed and a box of keys that didn't all match anything I recognized. By March of 2021, I'd run out of excuses. I needed to walk through the rooms, make a list of what could be salvaged, and make a decision. Keep it and invest, or sell it and carry the memories instead. I picked a Friday, told a friend my route, and promised to call from town Sunday night. The property has no power, no cell coverage, no nothing. Just propane lanterns, a wood stove with a draft that has to be sweet-talked, and a tin roof that turns rain into a drum solo. The gravel road in was worse than memory. Winter washouts had carved the crown into a series of poor choices, and my little sedan bumped and groaned like it had opinions about my life decisions. When the trees broke and the porch came into view, I parked and just sat. The place looked tough and tired all at once. Paint curled at the edges like old paper. The porch sagged just a little over the crawl space. Laurel had crept in as if it were sizing up the steps. Inside was dust and quiet. The main room was exactly as my hands remembered it. Wide plank floor, pine table with one leg that always needed a folded magazine. The pot-bellied stove in the corner like a warm memory even when cold. 2 small bedrooms branched off, and a bathroom my grandfather half-plumbed and then decided buckets were simpler. The smell was the usual cabin cocktail. Dry wood, old smoke, a line of mothballs nobody admitted to putting there. I propped windows, swept a winter's worth of grit out the door, and coaxed the lanterns to life. I built a small fire, fed it maple from the shed, and felt the temperature shift from stingy to kind. Dinner was simple camp food on a little stove, eaten with my coat still on and my hat pushed up. Then I pulled photo albums from the bedroom closet. My grandmother's habit of labeling every face in pencil has saved at least 3 family arguments, and let the evening soften around me. Around 9, too tired to do more than yawn, I carried my sleeping bag into the smaller bedroom and stopped dead. There was a coffee mug on the nightstand. It was one of ours, an ugly, thick diner mug my grandfather liked because it kept heat, and I was sure I hadn't set it there. I had been in and out of that room all afternoon, moving boxes, stacking linens, talking to myself like the stale air would answer. My eyes went to the dark line inside the mug. I lifted it. There was still liquid in the bottom, tepid rather than cold, and it smelled like coffee that had lost its work ethic only an hour ago. Every small hair on my arms stood up. I did a slow, careful loop of the main room. A drawer I'd left shut was edged open. One lantern had been moved half a foot. A couch cushion bore a shallow oval like someone had leaned into it and stood back up. None of it was dramatic. All of it felt wrong. I picked up the iron poker from beside the stove and a flashlight and made myself do the grown-up thing. Room by room, closet by closet, under beds and behind the freestanding wardrobe that always squeaked as if it were telling on me. The cabin is tiny. Searching it cost me 3 minutes and left me with a racing heart and no answers. Nobody, nothing. Silence. In my grandparents' room, the bigger of the two where we only slept if storms were loud, I found the thing that convinced me I wasn't inventing danger. The bed was misbehaving. Blankets twisted, pillows with a clear head-shaped dip. On the floor beside the bed, half tucked by the nightstand, was a backpack I had never seen before. Modern, tough fabric. The kind of pack you buy when you want to disappear into a tree line. I unzipped it because curiosity has always been louder than fear, until fear truly arrives. Men's clothing. A toothbrush, ramen packets, jerky, a metal cup, a cheap headlamp, and a wallet. I put the zipper back like it was made of glass. The thing that had been an empty cabin I used to love was now a stranger's bedroom. Whoever owned that pack hadn't been here last summer. They had been here today. Maybe they were out at the spring. Maybe they were watching the windows from the tree line, trying to decide what to do about me. I decided for both of us. I would leave with what I could carry, drive out and call the sheriff from the gas station at the highway. I shoved my sleeping bag and a few essentials into my duffel, blew out the lamps and stepped onto the porch. My car looked off. It was sitting at a slant like it was tired of behaving. My light found the front passenger tire first, a wide gash in the sidewall, clean and rude. I didn't need to check the others, but I did. The rear driver's side had the same smiling wound. 2 flats, no spare that could save any part of that problem. I stared at the cut rubber and felt a heavy, simple fact land in my chest. Whoever had lived here knew I was here and did not intend to let me leave the way I came. Back inside, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the knob because sometimes you need the comfort of old movie tactics. I latched windows. I pulled curtains. Then I sat in the corner where I could see the front and back doors at the same time and tried to think in straight lines. The poker felt ridiculous and necessary in my hands. The fire had become a liability. I let it sink into coals and turned the room to shadow. Time lengthened. The cabin breathed old wood noises. Somewhere on the ridge, an owl asked a question. At first, I thought I could hear my own pulse in the floorboards. Then the floorboards learned a new sound. Footsteps on the porch. I held my breath so hard my lungs hurt. The handle on the front door clicked. A small, polite sound like someone trying not to wake me. The chair held. The clicking stopped. Slow steps traveled the porch boards to the window. I saw nothing through the curtain, but pressure lives in the air when someone is inches away on the other side of a thin wall. The steps continued down the stairs around the corner. A finger tried the back door, patient as rain. Metal ticked in the hasp where my grandfather's old padlock hung useless, more relic than barrier. The steps moved on. Another window. Another pause. A circle, like a predator learning fences. I called out because I didn't know what else to do, and bluster is cheaper than bravery. I called the police, I said, lying so hard my throat burned. They're on their way up the road right now. The steps stopped. For a moment, I let myself believe I'd punctured whatever plan was outside my walls. 10 minutes passed. 20. I started to believe in the lie I'd told. Around 3, the soft heart and throat sounds traded places with something unapologetic. The brittle pop of glass giving up. It came from the far bedroom I'd searched first. Not the room with the backpack. The other. I heard the rasp of a sash being forced, the scrape of wood against frame, then the unmistakable weight of a body coming through a window. Careful with boots on a sill. I wanted to run out the front door, but the road outside was black as a well, and the woods don't forgive panic at night. Instead, I pressed deeper into my corner. The poker balanced across my knees and listened to whoever had just entered move through the house. They didn't come toward me. They moved with a plan, straight to the big bedroom. Drawers opened and shut with an urgency that sounded too practiced to be nervous. The clink of metal, a zipper's fast teeth, then boots on the floorboards again, crossing back to the broken window. The soft grunt of someone lifting themselves out into the night. I didn't move. I waited until the sky began its quiet transformation from black to graphite, until birds negotiated a truce with morning, until I could make shapes out of furniture without needing my flashlight. I checked the big bedroom. The bed was empty and worse for wear. The backpack was gone. The mud prints told a brisk story from window to bed to window. When the light outside was gray-blue rather than gray-black, I left. I didn't touch anything else. I locked the front door because rituals matter even when they don't make practical sense. And I walked down the driveway and turned onto the gravel road. 5 miles to the highway feels like 40, when the trees on both sides seem to be leaning in to listen. I walked fast and did not look behind me except once, and that once was enough to keep me from doing it again. 2 hours later, an old pickup rattled up behind me and slowed. A couple in their 70s leaned toward the passenger window with the faces strangers wear when they recognize fear. I told the edited version. They put me in their cab, gave me water, and drove me to the little town where the diner and the sheriff share a parking lot. I went into the law side and gave the unedited version. Deputies drove up within the hour, and later that afternoon they walked me through my own footprints. They photographed everything. They lifted partial prints. They took the mug, the broken glass, a can left under the bed that wasn't from any decade my family had shopped in. One of them studied the tire cuts and said, almost conversationally, that whoever did it had used a good knife and didn't hesitate. I nodded because I didn't trust what my mouth might do if I used it. It didn't even take a week. A name came back attached to the prints and to things found in a little tarp camp, a couple miles away down along a creek. A 38-year-old with priors for burglary, trespass and theft, who had been living in the national forest for months. He admitted to borrowing cabins. He admitted to my tires. He said he thought if he scared me enough I'd leave and not come back, and he could keep using the place like he had been. When he heard me shout about the police, he bailed, grabbed the pack he'd stashed, and disappeared into his little gridless network of deer paths. There were other items at his camp. Cookware, tools, small things that had walked out of sheds and screened porches all through the valley. The deputies found owners for most of it. They put handcuffs on a man who liked the shadows. Paperwork did what paperwork is supposed to do, and he is now in a concrete place with fluorescent lights and a schedule. None of that made sleeping easier. The cabin I adored became a lesson I did not want but understand completely now. The porch where we shelled beans felt in my mind like a target. I tried to picture myself back there on a July afternoon with a book and a mason jar of iced tea. My hands would sweat just thinking about it. After a few months of pretending I might grow brave, I sold it. The new owners are a young couple who smiled big and said they were excited to fix it up and put in a little solar and spend fall weekends there. I wished them everything good and meant it. I still love the ridge. I still love woods and the way time behaves differently under trees, but I have recalibrated what solitude means. It isn't a romantic camera filter. It's a fact with math behind it. Distance plus no signal plus one person equals a situation that can tilt fast. Remote is marvelous right up until it is not, and there are people who count on that pivot. If you have a place like ours, like mine used to be, treat it like you live in the present tense, not a postcard. Go off and walk the outside before you go in. Look for small wrongnesses. A moved chair, a cup you don't remember, a curtain tugged half an inch. Bring a camera that timestamps what you see. Keep a neighbor in the loop. Put in battery cameras if you can, the kind that send pictures later when you're back in town. Stash a spare tire that isn't 50 years old. Leave a copy of your plan with a person who will actually notice if you don't text on time. And if you ever arrive and your gut goes cold because the room feels occupied by a presence you can't see but your brain insists is there, believe it. Step back, close the door, turn around. There's no prize for bravery in an empty place, and nobody gives you a ribbon for confronting a stranger who's made your house into theirs. Call the people with badges and radios. Let them do the knock and announce and the clearing and the quiet conversations in the woods. I keep a photo of the cabin on my fridge. My grandmother in a lawn chair, ankles crossed, holding a paperback she didn't finish because my grandfather was telling a story that needed her attention. Still makes me smile. It doesn't make me foolish. Beauty and danger can sit on the same porch. The woods don't change for our feelings, and isolation doesn't care that your memories are good. I learned that on a cold March night with a poker in my hands and my breath held like it was a shield, listening to boots find their way around my walls. The mountains are still beautiful. They don't owe us safety. That's on us.